October, Nissan, and today is the 19th, I think.
Yes.
The day of learning Jerry and Rochelle Ebner in memory of his father Yitzchak Isaac ben Avraham. Wow. Yitzchak Isaac ben Avraham. What a name. Okay. Karen and Rabbi Kenneth Green in memory of her father Shalom Tzvi ben Ara. We are at the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amid Beis. We have been talking heretofore about mitzvahs that are chol on men, but not on women. Now we're moving to another set of mitzvahs that are totally ba'oretz. There are certain mitzvahs that are obligatory only in Eretz Yisrael. For instance, Shemitah, Trumas and Maasros. Okay, we do have a concept of Maaser, but that's Maaser Mammon. But if you have a tree in your backyard, you don't have to take Trumas and Maasros from it. Okay, almost all, but not all, of the land-related mitzvahs, agricultural mitzvahs, so to okay, are applicable and only in Israel. We're going to learn in the Mishnah that two of them are not applicable elsewhere. The mitzvah of Orla, if you have an apple tree in your backyard, you can't eat apples if it grows in the first 3 years. The fourth year, since you're not going to take the apple to Israel, they won't let it on the plane, you have to redeem it and take the, many people have a quarter on the windowsill in the kitchen, and they redeem like Maaser and whatever, if produce comes from Israel and is not tithe, and then you spend that money in Jerusalem on food. And the other one is Chodosh. Okay, you're not allowed to eat new grain until the second day of Pesach. Now, for hundreds of years in Chutz La'aretz, they were not noheg with Chodosh, and many of us probably don't keep Chodosh. However, that was because of Svek Sveka. There are some poskim, a few, who say that it's not noheg Chutz La'aretz, so that makes it a suffix. And then there's a suffix for hundreds of years. You went in and you bought grain. You bought wheat. You bought flour. You didn't know when it came. You just took what was in the store. Today, everything is got this barcode or this. In other words, every single item, every cookie, everything, we can determine from the packaging exactly when that grain was harvested. So now it's just one suffix. And because there could be a tinge of it, maybe as a deraisa, we hold that in this case, even though it's a derabanan, we do say that Chodosh is noheg bazman hazeh. All right, we'll do the Mishnah. What? I'm on the next. Oh, you walked out yesterday. Lamed Vav. I apologize. I was so terrible yesterday that you had to walk out. All right. So Lamed Vav Amid Beis, the last 3 lines. Kol mitzvah shehu toloi ba'aretz. Every land-related mitzvah. That's, Trumas, Maasros, Shechvapei, all that stuff, Shemitah. There are a whole bunch of land-related mitzvahs, Klayim. All mitzvahs shehu toloi ba'aretz, all mitzvahs that are related to the ground, or dependent, they say, on the ground. Ein noheged sela ba'aretz are only applicable in Eretz Yisrael. V'she'ein tolei ba'aretz, if it's not linked to the land, like putting on tefillin, right? Noheges ben ba'aretz ben b'chutz la'aretz is applicable both in Israel and outside of Israel. Chutz min orla v'kolayim, except for orla, which is a mitzvah, as I mentioned, 3 years and then 1 year on tree fruits, anything from an eitz. And by the way, eitz does not mean a big tree. Eitz has a halachic definition. So say blueberries are eitz. So if you plant the blueberry bush illegally because the HOA would make you tear it out, but if you get away with it, you can't eat the blueberries for the first 3 years. Okay. And Kalayim, if Kalayim has more than one application of Kalayim is planting diverse food, planting grapes and wheat in the same patch. But Kalayim also has to do with wool and linen and garments, with yoking an ox and a horse. So Kalayim is not always Toloi Ba'aretz, and therefore it's Nohe Chutz La'aretz. So you can't plant, Bob, I know it's just distressing to you, but you can't plant wheat in your grapevine. Okay, you're going to have to live with it. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Af HaChadash. Rabbi Eliezer says, including HaChadash. So we don't know at this point whether Rabbi Eliezer is talking to the Tanakama and he's adding that Chadash is Tolei Ba'aretz and is not Nohei Chutz La'aretz, or we don't, or maybe he's at the end, he is arguing with the Tanakama and he's saying it is Tolei B'chutz La'aretz. The Gemara will tell us. Okay? My Tolei or Masha Eina Tolei. What is the difference between a mitzvah that's Tolei Ba'aretz and one that's not Tolei Ba'aretz? Now, okay. There are psukim, for instance, the psukim on Shemitah are introduced with a preliminary pasuk. When you come into the land and you conquer and settle it, then blah, blah, blah. So we're discussing how many of those 3 words, right, are required before something is tolei b'aretz. So the Gemara says here, okay, if you say that a mitzvah is tolei ba'aretz because the introduction to that block of mitzvah, to that mitzvah, says when you come into the land, she'ein tolei b'loksiv b'biyah, and maybe a mitzvah that's not tolei ba'aretz is because it's not introduced with a phrase biyah, and again, conquer Chodesh and Yishuv and live there. But okay, we're dealing with just biyah first. Hare tefillin upeter chamor dichsiv behen biyah. The mitzvah of tefillin is, and the mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn if you own a donkey, are introduced with the word biyah. Okay, and you have to wear tefillin both in Israel and Chutz La'aretz. Okay, and similarly with Petra Rechem. Amar of Yehuda Hachikamar, here's what we're trying to say. Kol mitzvah shehi chayvas haguf noheges bein b'eretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. Any mitzvah which is a personal obligation. You have a personal obligation to put on tefillin. If you happen to own a female donkey, and the female donkey's first baby is a male, I don't know the word for a baby donkey, a male baby donkey, then you have to either swap it out for a sheep and give the sheep or goat to a Kohen, or you have to chop off the baby's head. Those are your options, okay? But that's a personal obligation. So those are chavis. Okay, those are both in Israel and Chutz La'aretz. Two examples. Chavis karka ain't in the hegdus of Israel, but a land-related obligation, like if you plant, you can't eat the fruit, the wheat, until after the second of Pesach when the Korban Omer. Now, in those days, it was as soon as they brought the Korban Omer, like 12 o'clock. After the Beis Hamikdash, they made a decree that it's all day the second day of Pesach. So even if you bake matzah, Bob, you have to use old. You can't get the farmer to give you new wheat the second day of Pesach to bake your matzah. Okay? I'm really laying a lot of disappointments on you today. Okay. Menohani Mili, how do we know this? Okay, the Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Eila hachukim, these are the chukim, elu midrashos. So we usually think of chukim as rules that we can't figure out a rationale for. But this brisa is telling us chukim are dinim that are not explicitly written, but are derived from a pasuk. That's how this brisa is interpreting it. And the pasuk goes on, v'hamishpatim, and it explains that elu hadinim. These are the explicit rules: do not steal, don't move your boundary block, etc. Asher tishmarun, that you guard. Zu Mishnah, that's learning and relearning your Torah. It doesn't here mean Mishnah, it means learning and relearning. La'asos, to do, is the next word in the pasuk. Maisa, that means to perform the mitzvah. Ba'oretz, in the land. Yachol, kol ha-mitzvahs kulan lo yihei nohegem. No hagim ela be'oretz. So from this pasuk, I might decide you only have to do the Jewish stuff if you live in Israel. Talmud Loimer, the pasuk goes on to say, Kol hayomim asher atem chayim al ha'adama. Pasuk concludes, all the days that you are alive on planet Earth, which expands it to beyond Israel. If the Torah had only said all of your days, I might think that all the mitzvahs, even those that are tulid oretz, apply chutz la'aretz, and your farm in Kansas, you have to leave payim. But no, Talmud Lomer ba'oretz, the pasuk concludes ba'oretz. That means only certain mitzvahs are only in Israel. Acher sheriba kasev miyat. The pasuk starts and it gives a riboy. You have to do everything anywhere on earth. And then it comes with a miyat that limits it. Tzavulmad ma she'amur be'inyan. Go and learn the resolution of that little bit of a conflict. Aved ta'avdun es kol hamakaimus asher avdu sham, etc. There's a pasuk that says you have a personal obligation to destroy avodah zaras wherever you find them, even outside of Israel. Ma avodas kachavim miyuchedes sheichovas aguf. There's a uniqueness to the mitzvah of destroying avodah zaras because it's an obligation on your body. Now, today we apply this mitzvah like you can't buy a beautiful little Buddha statue. Okay? You would have to break it if you bought it. So don't spend money on a Buddha statue. Okay? So no heges ben ba'oretz uben b'chutz la'aretz, so it would be applicable both in Israel and outside of Israel. Af kol shi choyves haguf no heges ben ba'oretz uben b'chutz la'aretz. So too, all personal individual mitzvahs that are mechuyev on you, tefillin, tzitzis, kashrus, etc. Okay, is both in Israel and outside of Israel. Now, going back to the Mishnah, chutz min ha'orla v'kla kilayim, exempted from that is kalayim and orla, which even though they are essentially ground related, we're talking about a farmer in Israel planting wheat in his vineyard, nonetheless, and they're applicable chutz la'aretz, and based on what we'll say in a few minutes, Rav Eliezer adds chadash is also applicable chutz la'aretz. Iboilahu, they asked the question. Now we're getting into the Rav. What is Rav Eliezer talking about? Rav Eliezer l'kula polig or l'chumra polig. Is Rav Eliezer going l'kula, meaning it's not, chadash is not applicable outside of Israel, or is going l'chumra, meaning it is applicable outside of Israel? L'chumra polig v'hakika omer tanakama. Maybe Rav Eliezer is actually going l'chumra, and he's adding it on to the Tanakama because the Tanakama says chutz min orla min haklayim, except for orla and klayim, which do apply outside of Israel, but he didn't say chadash. The hilchas gemiri law, and we have, why is klayim and orla klayim? Orla rather applicable outside of Israel? Hilchas gemiri, we have a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Afal gafte ikel l'meimer chovis karkehi. I might think that orla, where you're planting a tree, is obviously a land-related mitzvah, and therefore you need the halacha l'Moshe Messinai to expand it out of Israel. Aval chodesh be'eretz ein b'chutz la'aretz lo. But chadash, which is not in the halacha l'Moshe Messinai, should by rights only apply in Eretz Yisrael. My timer, Moshe v'lacha Yerusha v'yeshiva mashma, because dwelling, you have to have chadash where you dwell, and dwelling is defined as after we conquer it and make an inheritance for our families and dwell in it. That's what it means. So Rebbe Eliezer l'meimer, and then Rebbe Eliezer comes along and says, Af chadash noched bein ba'aretz or bein l'chutz la'aretz, that chadash is applicable also outside of Israel. My timer, what's his rationale? Moshav, the word Moshav simply means to live somewhere. V'chol makom sha'atem yoshvim. And therefore he applies it to anywhere you happen to live, even in Boca on Bob's farm. Okay. Idilma, maybe. L'kula palig v'hachikomer tanakama. And maybe Rebbe Eliezer is saying, no, Chadash is only in Israel, and he's adding it, this is what the Tanakama was trying to say. Chutz min ha'orla v'haklayim. Klayim and orla are different, that they're also chutz la'aretz. The hilsa gemirale, because we learn halacha Moshe Messinai, that orla is also out of Israel. The chol shekain chadash. And how much more so chadash should be applicable outside Israel? The Moshe kol makom shitein yoshvim mashma, that the Tanakama says that chadash applies because people live places and plant and so on. Okay, v'yaseh Rebbe Eliezer l'meimer, and then if you learn it that way, that the Tanakama includes chadash, then Rebbe Eliezer is saying except chadash, meaning not applicable outside of Israel. Chodesh ain't a noeg ela ba'aretz, and in that version, Rebbe Eliezer is saying Chodesh does not apply in Israel. The Moshe Lacher Yerusha Yeshiva Mashma, that unless otherwise indicated, the word Moshe means after you conquer and establish communities and dwell there. Okay, umay af. So why does Rebbe Eliezer use the word af? He didn't have to. He could have just said chodesh. So why does he add the af? Kamaisa, he's going back to the very first rule that chodesh does apply only in Eretz Yisrael, according to this version too. Toishma. So which version is right? Toishma. The Amar Abaya Mantana de Paligale de Rebbe Eliezer, who is the Tanakama in our Mishnah. So he argues with Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Yishmael. It's Rebbe Yishmael. The Sanya, we can prove it by bringing a brisa. Okay. Part of the korban process is pouring wine into a hole that was on the Mizbeach. Now, there's going to be a machlokas whether or not when they brought korbanos in the midbar, whether they did wine libations. Now, don't ask me how they got wine in the midbar. I don't know. Okay? So, the Tanya Rebbe Shmuel says, Lamadecha to teach you, Shechol Makom Shenemer Bo Moshav Eina Ela La'acher Yerusha V'Yeshiva Divrei Rebbe Yishmael. So Rebbe Yishmael says that the word Moshav applies only in Israel after it's conquered and settled. Okay? And therefore he would say that they did not do libations of wine when they brought personal sacrifices in the midbar. Amar la Rabbi Akiva challenges him. Hare Shabbos, what about Shabbos? Shenemer bo moshavos. It says in the psukim of Shabbos that you have to keep Shabbos in your moshev. We'll call moshavos all of your dwelling areas. The noheges bein ba'aretz ubein b'chutz la'aretz, and yet Shabbos is applicable even outside of Israel. So doesn't that prove the word dwellings means anywhere, not just in Israel? So Amar Lo, Rabbi Shmuel would answer back, Shabbos kal v'chomer asya. Yeah, if I only had that pasuk, I would say Shabbos only applies in Israel. Fortunately, we have a kal v'chomer. Matzos kalos na a mitzvahs kalos na heges bein ba'aretz ubein b'chutz la'aretz. If much less serious mitzvahs are applicable outside of Israel, Shabbos Chamira, Shabbos, which is the most chomer day we have, lo kol shekain, how much more so that should apply outside of Israel. So he says, according to the pasuk, yeah, it would only be in Israel, but we have the Kal V'chomer, and therefore we keep Shabbos even in Boker Raton. Now, with the Omer Abaya Mantan, the Pali Gale, the Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Yishmael, because Abaya said that the Tanakam in our Mishnah is Rebbe Yishmael, Shmamina Rebbe Eliezer L'chumra Pali. So we derive from that, since the Tanakama is Rabbi Yishmael, and he says the word Moshe always means in Israel, then he would say that you don't have to do Chodesh outside of Israel. And Rebbe Eliezer argues and says you do. Okay, that's how we have to learn it. Shmamina Rebbe Eliezer l'chumra, that he's bringing it l'chumra. Toshma. So learn from that, and the halacha is that Chodesh is applicable outside of Israel. Michti, let's look further. Rabbi Yishmael Ahechakoi, what pasuk, how does Rabbi Yishmael prove from the Torah that the word Moshav and its variants mean only in Israel. So he used Nesachim. He used the concept of the Nusachim, which goes with Korbanos. Bin Nusachim, by talking about, but the problem is, turn the page, the word Nusachim, boy, Moshe Sibahu, it has both the word when you come in and it has the word when you dwell. So you need, maybe not all three, but you need at least come in and dwell. That's where his archetype is. So how can he come up with just dwell as meaning only in Israel? V'hachi kamar, here's what he tries to say. Lalamed shekol makam shenemor biya u'moshav eina ela la'acha Yerusha yeshiva divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says to come into Israel and to live there obviously means after you come in and beat up the Canaanites and conquer and settle the land. You can't move to, you can't, the Palestinians don't want Jews living in their land. So the Canaanites probably felt the same way. Okay, so he says you don't need all the words if it's obvious that the concept is there. So if that's the case, how come Rabbi Akiva said, Hare Shabbos nemer bo Mesheves v'yomer lo Shabbos kol v'chomer? So why did Rabbi Akiva challenge him by talking about Shabbos and where it uses the word Moshe? And then Rabbi Yishmael said, no, I'm not using Moshe. I use Moshe for Shabbos in Israel, but I use the Kal V'chomer for Shabbos in Brooklyn. Okay? Namely, so instead, Rabbi Yishmael should have said, Ana boy Moshe Kamina, that all you need both coming and dwelling, and Shabbos just says the word dwelling. Okay? So, Chadava Ot Kamerle. So Rabbi Yishmael is using a structure called, on the first, on the one hand, and then also. Okay? Chada da Ana boy Moshe Kamina. On the one hand, it says they come and they dwell, and it doesn't say just dwell. And furthermore, the Amart Hari Shabbos Nemer Bo Moshavo Shabbos Kol V'chomer, when it by the word pasuk for Shabbos that only has the word dwell, I don't hang on to the word dwell. I hang on to the Kal V'chomer. So now, so let's see now exactly what their dispute is. But my Kamifligi, what are they arguing about? This is Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. What are they arguing about? Nesachim b'midbar Kamifligi. Because they're arguing about whether they did do wine libations when an individual, all public korbanos still had wine. But when an individual brings a korban, a chatis, he beat up his wife, whatever it was, Nechasim b'midbar Kamifligi, that's what they're arguing about. Rabbi Yishmael Savar Lo Kervo Nesachim b'midbar. Individuals did not pour wine in the midbar. But Rabbi Akiva Savar Kervu, they did Nesachim b'midbar, pour wine in the midbar. Okay, now we're going to repeat the original argument and come up with a third possibility for Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Abaya Ha Tana Debe Rabbi Yishmael. Now this is complicated. We're going to quote two Tanoim, both of whom recited brises in Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva. One is going to say one thing, and the other Tana in his yeshiva is going to contradict him, and we're going to debate that. Okay? Amar Abaya Hatana Debe Rabbi Yishmael. He was a Tana in the yeshiva. Rabbi Yishmael will call him Tana 1. Mafik the Idach Tana the Bay Rabbi Yishmuel, and he argues with Tana, another Tana, Tana 2 in Rabbi Yishmuel's yeshiva. The Tana the Bay Rabbi Shmuel, this first Tana said, no, Tana 2 says, Hoel v'nemru biyos b'toyra stam. Whenever the pasuk talks about a mitzvah, that's when you come to Israel, and it does not have Yerosh conquer or Yoshev dwell. It just says come. Okay. Prat lacha kasav bi'echad mehin la'acher Yerusha yeshiva. And in one of the times that idea is expressed, they do have the other two words of conquer and dwell. Okay? So there what he's talking about is, in that price, he's talking about the psukim. It says when you come to Israel and you conquer the land and you dwell there, appoint a king. Now we know Shaul wasn't appointed for like 1,000 years. So we're going to have a machlokes whether they should have appointed these two Tanaim. They should have appointed a king immediately, or it wasn't so necessary. Okay. Yerusha Yeshiva. So whenever the words also Yerusha and Yeshiva appear, it means right after you settle. Okay? The Edach, the other guy, the other Tana, I think I called him Tana 1. Mishum dahave melech ubichurim shnei ksuvas haboyim kiechod. There are two psukim that are similar in structure and wording. One says appoint the king, and the other says bring your first fruits to Jerusalem on Shavuos. Okay, so this maybe we apply, according to him, the rule that two psukim that bring that same idea you can't get third, fourth, or fifth ideas from it. We've had this several times before. The Edach, the Tana 2, he says, you need those psukim to shmo. Tell us what they say. Okay? The kasav Rahman Melech v'lo kasav Bikurim. If he only told you about after conquering and dwelling, you have to appoint a king. Havamina Bikurim deko mishane la'alter. I would have said that Bikurim have to be brought immediately, meaning when there was still the Mishkan in Shiloh and wherever else it went. Okay, Kasav Bikurim v'lo Kasav Melech. If it only talked Kasav Bikurim and not the pasuk about the king, Hava Amina Melech Didarko Lekavosh La'alter. Since you're going to war and you're conquering the land, a king, his major role is as a conqueror. So maybe he should have been appointed the minute you stepped over the Jordan. Okay, and that's why you needed the Yoshev, the Yoresh and Yoshev, so that you didn't have to appoint a king until the land was completely conquered. And we know Shaul was still fighting with the Plishtim, so even 1,000 years later, we could say that it wasn't fully conquered and they didn't violate that pasuk by waiting for Shaul. The Edach, what about the first Tana? Lichtav Rachmana Melech v'lo boy bikurim. Why don't we just have the pasuk and put all three words when you come, when you conquer and you settle with regard to the king? Va'ana mina, I would have said on my own, Uma Melech lichvosh la'acher Yerusha Yeshiva, that it's the king's job to do the conquering, and that's why you don't have to wait until everything is settled to appoint the king. Bikurim lo kol shekain, how much more so the Bikurim would not be applicable until you conquer and settle and build a base hamikdash. Okay, the Edach, going back to the other Tana in Rabbi Shmuel's Academy, Ikosiv Hachi, if you say it that way, Hava Amina Mide the Have Ahala. I would Achala, I'm sorry. I would say that the same delay concept that the Kurim has to be right away, and so does taking Chala from Isa. Kamash Malan, therefore we learn that the Kurim did not click in until after they were settled and fully settled and dwelling and built a base of Mikdash, and they brought it there. Okay.
Does settlement imply conquering?
No, you can move to Brooklyn without beating anybody up. But when they're your enemies, the Canaanite communities were our enemies. They didn't want us to take their houses. So we had to conquer first. Okay? Hashda, the Armad, Chayva Haguf. No, now we're going back to the original discussion. This was yeah.
If you're settling someplace, doesn't that mean you've conquered it?
No, not necessarily. There is a plateau somewhere in the Rocky Mountains that nobody lives. So, or a better example, before the United States was from sea to shining sea, the government said, if you move out to the unsettled places, meaning like Ohio, I didn't mean Kansas in those days, we'll give you 40 acres and a mule. So you went and you settled. Now, sometimes you had to beat up the Indians.
Right.
And that would be conquer and settle. But sometimes you didn't have to beat up the Indians. You just put up a fence and plowed, chopped down the trees and plowed your field, and you dwelled there for a long time. There are families that still have the original Yerushas.
There were many places that were not able to kick out the Goyim,
right?
And yet they said that they dwelt there.
But but that was Yerushalayim. I mean, it's not so cut and dry. But I can move to Phoenix. I don't have to conquer anybody. We could pick up everybody in Century Village. Why we would do it, I don't know. And all go and develop, buy a farm, make a development. Nobody was conquered. You bought the land. Problem here is that the Canaanites didn't want to sell the land and move. It's not unlike modern Israel today, where there's a conflict between the people who claim they're indigenous and the Jewish settlers who claim, yeah, but we were indigenous before, and by the way, God gave it to us. All right, let's go weiter. What? Well, in Israel, it's conquering and settling. I mean, the Israelis won a war and they occupied the West Bank. So that's conquering, and now they're settling. But it's not, those halachas are not applicable today, because when Ezra and Nehemiah came back, they created Kedushas Asidlavo. From Ezra and Nehemiah's time, that area that was biblical Israel by David is considered sanctified, and Jews, according to Torah, have the absolute right to dwell there. That's why they call it Judea and Samaria, to say that's what David had. All right, let's go weiter. V'hashta the amat chayves haguf no heges ben b'eretz Yisrael ben b'chutz la'aretz. Once we said we're going back to the original discussion, any mitzvah that's obligatory on an individual is obligatory anywhere in the world. Moshev the Kosav Rachmana Gabi Shabbos Lamali. Why did the pasuk, since Shabbos is a personal obligation, why did the pasuk have that word Moshav in it, in the Shabbos pasuk? Okay, so it's the rich. We do have to have the Moshav pasuk. Sal gedaite chamina hoil ubi inyana domoa dasksiva. The parsha in the parsha of the Jewish holidays. There's also the words Shomer Shabbos, and it's all one thing. You go through all of the Moadim, and then the last paragraph is Shabbos, right? So, how do we establish holidays? Not now, but at their time. Beis Din had to establish Moadim. So I might have learned that since Shabbos is in that parsha, that every Friday morning, Beis Din should have to proclaim tomorrow is Shabbos. If they forgot or they couldn't do it, then you wouldn't have to keep Shabbos that week. Huh? Have a barbecue, right? So, Tiboy Kiddush Ki Moados. Shabbos should have to be sanctified just like the holidays do. Kamash Malon, by using the word Moshav, wherever you are. There's obviously no Beis Din, no Sanhedrin in Boca, but in Boca we have to keep Shabbos. So that's why the Moshav is there, to avoid that misreading. Okay? Moshav, the Kosav Rachmana Gavi Chal Chelev V'dam Lamali. There is a word in the pasuk saying you can't eat chelev, which is certain fats and behemoths, like around the kidneys, etc. And you can't drink blood. And that pasuk has the word Moshe in it. So what's that doing there? So I might have thought that since chelev and dam are used on the mizbeach, that only when there was a mizbeach is those restrictions applicable. So the word Moshav expands it. Okay? Salke, it's three. We need the word Moshav. Salke daite chamina hoil ubin yona de korbonos sive. Prohibition of chalev and blood is written in conjunction with sacrifices. Bisman de ika korban nitzar chalev adam bisman leleka korbanos lo. I might have misunderstood and said that with that when we had a base mikdash and we had sacrifices, you couldn't eat chalev and dam. But now that there's no more sacrifices, you could eat chalev and dam. Kamash malan. So the Moshav in the pasuk comes to tell us that that's not so. You still can't eat chalev and dam. Moshav the kosav rachman agabi matzah umoror lamali. The psukim that tell us about Pesach, then you eat matzah and eat moror. And we still eat matzah today outside of Eretz Yisrael. Why is the word Moshav in that pasuk? It's trich. We need it there. Because if you look at the pasuk tells you to eat matzah, it says, on matzah and moror, eat it. What's the it? Korban Pesach. So I could say if there's no Korban Pesach, I don't have to eat matzah, and I especially don't have to eat the maror. Salkedaite chamina hoil diksiv al matzah sumorim yochle luhu. Bisman de ika Pesach ein, bisman de leka Pesach lo. Kamash malon. If there's a Korban Pesach, I would guess you eat matzah and maror together with it. But no Korban Pesach, no matzah and maror. Therefore, you need the Moshav in that pasuk. Boy, the kosav rachman gavi tefillin v'peter chamor lamali. Why is the word bia, which means entering Israel, so in psukim telling us about tefillin, and in psukim telling us about peter chamor? We need it because of another Bryce in Rabbi Shmuel's yeshiva. Mitzvah zu shebishvila techanes la'aretz. Sanctify the firstborn. meaning you have to do the pidyon of the Petach Hamor, because it is an enabler to go to Israel. Where God dealt differently with the firstborn of Egypt than anybody else. So by dealing differently with firstborns, Petach Hamor, Bechor, our Poda, our Bechor, all of those things remind God of why he took us out of it, Kaviyachol, remind God of why he took us out of Egypt, and they're enablers to let us go back to the land. So this is an important idea. If now it's not us anymore, but if your children and grandchildren have babies and do a pidyon, or if you happen to buy a donkey and it has a baby and you do the pidyon, or you happen to buy a sheep and she has a baby and you give the Kohen the Bechor, all those things are helping our returning to Israel when Mashiach comes. So that all works fine, according to the opinion that the word Moshev means even in Brooklyn or Boca. That's why the pasuk says, "V'yachlu me'aver haaretz macharas haPesach." That's the pasuk of Chadash. You may eat from the grain that grows in Israel or grows in the land the day after Pesach, the first day of Pesach. Machamaras haPesach achol meikora la'achol. So they could eat Chadash after they brought the korban omer, but not before. Akarav omer v'hadar echol. First they ate the omer, they brought the korban omer, and that was a matir to eat Chadash, which before that could not be eaten. We'll pick up tomorrow on Lamed Ches, the end of the first line. All right, that went fast. I'm surprised.
Mordecai, what's with Mel?
Mel had a dentist appointment, and Ruvain didn't show up. I was parked in front of his apartment at 6:25. I stayed there for 7 minutes, and then I came. So that's the story.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Am I going too fast?
No.
Good.
The fellow who usually sits there,
Huh?
because the Mordecai who usually sits there is not interrupting.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You finish earlier without interruptions.
Ah,
So that's
you got to do some interrupting back there.
okay.
I tried, but you keep going.
I didn't. You have to speak loud. Even with my hearing aids, I don't always hear you.
Okay. Where's Zev?
Yeah, Zev has been out a couple of days.
Zev hasn't been here. I'll call him clean letter this morning. And the Mel and Sid is away, but he doesn't come anymore. He goes to the 8:30 minute.
Ruvain is under the weather, you think?
Who? He called me last night. He didn't come yesterday, and we didn't learn together yesterday. He called me last night and said, "Please pick him up at 6:30."
Right.
I parked in front of his elevator, and I waited 7 minutes,
Mhm.
and he didn't come, which is why I was late today.
Well, no one would know you were late.
Well, Solomon was here before me.
Solomon?
Yes, Moshe Solomon. I told him he has to go back out and come in again. You know, being among the first 10 is a big deal.
I made up for everybody who came early.
Okay.
Have
So,
a good day, everyone.
same to you, Bob.
Successful.
How you feeling?
Thank God. Thank
Good.
God. Well,
How's your wife? What is the neurologist?
They want to do more tests. One thing he's sure, and he says it's not cancer. So that's good.
Okay.
But-
You know that joke.
but,
I went to the doctor and he gave me a full exam and he says, I have good news. I have bad news and worse news. I said, what's the bad news? He says, you have Alzheimer's. And I said, I'm sorry, the bad news, you have cancer. What's the worst news? You have Alzheimer's. So I said, well, Baruch Hashem, I don't have cancer. There's Bob. Catch Bob. His phone is here.
I'll call him.
What?
I'll call him.
His phone is here. Oh, I didn't put the towels. God.
I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the cost, the association, it's going out of sight. Said the drafted letter to go out saying the board has approved this, and I said, I'm not approving it.
What is it? What is it?
You're talking about the increase?
Yeah.
Well, the insurance almost doubled. And then we have to, if you live in a 4-story building, they have to do an inspection. That's like 50 grand. You know, we have the multiple buildings. And then they're going to have to make an assessment when he tells us what's wrong with the building.
And then we have reserves, there's new reserve.
Good.
Well, it depends on your association. Like Yarmouth has been very good about developing the reserves over the years. Some have not been.
Ainsley has also, and we've gone up 60%.
No, because of all the new requirements.
That's crazy.
Well, it's not crazy. You don't. We've been under for all these years.
Under what? We have
We-
not, we have not had any
We
unusual
never
damages.
considered that the buildings decay, and there was
Well, you said you
never.
had reserves.
We have reserves for the roof. We have reserves for the things they know about. But now we're going to find out about the unknowns. And everything else is going up. The taxes went up. The insurance went up. Electricity went up 23%. I think. No, look at it. It's got things floating.
Yeah, that's the
There's
core.
well-
Throw it away.
They're dwelling in it.
Just throw it away.
They're dwelling in
They
it.
conquered and are dwelling.
I had a couple cookies ready.
That's the rest of it.
I don't think it's a gas, I think-
Oh, it's funny, in the other kitchen, but they sent this bottle of John Walker Red. But I'm gonna stop saying that again, but I want to taste that. It stinks. Okay.
What's the other something?
The high-
other drug about the bed?
The high, with the Ventura.
His phone is there. He left it out. I think if we have enough people getting to our political people, legislature people, saying this is crazy, maybe it works for some other association, other places, but not in Century Village. I'm not saying I can't afford it. But it don't matter. My neighbor, well, I'm a corner park.
Yeah.
It's going about 70%, from $325 to $600.
There's some people that's rough.
That's it. But other people go from 200 to 350. It's rough.
Yeah.
That's rough too.
I know my farming insurance, close to double. It went up by $800. Then I was thinking going up, getting them in an argument, and then it didn't the paper. What was it? Farm was
A couple of them left.
Farm, State Farm. I think it's the name of the company. Left something like 100,000 customers to left your eyes.
This has been going on over for a while because people call me. So my insurance company canceled, and I can't find anybody else. And they said we found somebody, but they want a copy of the roof inspection for the entire building, not for your apartment, but for the entire building.
Well, that's
And nobody could find out. And we found that out. People were just really very.
yeah. But the thing is, what they have to come now is that we're involved with the state is once again involved. What happened in Surfside, it's very expensive. The inspection is expensive. And what happened, and this is said in Surfside, it was brought up that there were the people that lived there, they were noticing little crack and everything else.
And they didn't do it.
They didn't want it because of the expense.
Yeah, it's really expensive. They said no.
We don't want.
But I don't think we got that here. We have just completed the engineering inspection and the construction. There's all these other stuff that wasn't included by this engineer who said, I have brought you up to date on everything that's important. Now, but they've come up with other stuff. I think we get into our political people, our representatives, Senate representatives, assemblymen. Say, this is Century Village. Hey, your phone is here.
Yeah.
I was gonna call you. I said, when I could go to the office and see if there was a home phone number.
You probably would have called me collect.
Or I could write a letter.